Hi everyone, it's Madeline, QVM Trader Connect Program Manager and Business Mentor, and it's great to see you all here at this Women in Business event. During the COVID-19 pandemic, concerns about mental health and substance use have grown, including concerns about suicidal ideation. Many people across the country have experienced job or income loss, with consistently reported higher rates of symptoms of anxiety and depression. And I think that we've all been touched by someone or ourselves to a certain degree during this time. Today we welcome our guest speaker, Amanda Linton, who has spent her career working with Australian small businesses. She established a bookkeeping and MyOb consulting company in 2005, and in 2008, Amanda was a finalist in the Telstra Businesswoman of the Year Awards. In 2010, she was appointed as an Australian Director of the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, ICB, and in 2012, she helped launch National Bookkeeping Training and Development Company. In November 2017, Amanda was appointed as a CEO of ICB. Amanda is a volunteer speaker for Beyond Blue, a national organisation that works to raise awareness about anxiety and depression, reduce the associated stigma, and encourage people to get help. Amanda became a Beyond Blue speaker to share her mental health journey to help highlight to audiences the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, and to encourage those affected to be brave enough to reach out for help. She loves catching up with friends to enjoy a cheese platter and a nice light glass of Barossa Red, which I have just organised with my friends for this Saturday night. Listening to music, her involvement in drill dance, and relaxing with her husband Peter and her two very spoiled cats, Abby and Tilly. A big welcome, Amanda, who is going to share her journey of hope, recovery and resilience in the face of mental health conditions.
Thanks, Madeline, and hi to everyone again, now more formally. Lovely to have you, have those of you who are on live, and for those who might be listening to the recording, welcome. Really what my intention is today is to give you a little bit of just background information around mental health in Australia, and then part of what we're aiming to do is for me to tell you my story, which is quite varied, around mental health and my challenge with depression and anxiety, and basically how I came out the other side of that, and hoping that you can draw something from that. Now, for those who are online with us, I'd love for you to ask questions if you like, either along the way or pop them in the chat, and we can have a proper Q&A at the end if you would like. But other than that, we'll kick off. So as Madeline mentioned, I'm a part of the Beyond Blue Professional Speaker Bureau. And Beyond Blue, as most of you would know, is an independent not-for-profit working to address the issues particularly associated with anxiety and depression around Australia. So their key aims are about raising awareness about the depression and anxiety and reducing the associated stigma. And we do that by talking. We do that by having these kinds of conversations and trying to break down some of those stereotypes and barriers. So if you have a think about the people that you work with, about the people who are around you in your family, there's a fair chance that someone that you know, may even be you, either has or knows someone who is going through either dealing with depression and or anxiety, and in the last 20 months it's been a lot more prevalent, and I don't think we need to spell out exactly why that is, but clearly there's been some challenges. But just to let you know, there are approximately 2 million people experiencing an anxiety condition in Australia at the moment, or recorded, and more than 1 million people who are dealing with a depression. We know that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 8 men will experience depression sometime in their lifetime. The interesting thing to note is that research actually shows us that women generally tend to reach out for help before it gets to a crisis point. Unfortunately, I've bucked that trend somewhat, and you'll hear a bit about that in a moment. But men generally don't reach out for help until such time as a crisis is actually hit, or they've hit the proverbial brick wall. So it's really important, as I said, to just break down some of these stigmas and let's start having these conversations. The thing that I know I found is sometimes it's really hard to think about people that you love who might be going through some of these, or people who you really care about, or that one day you and yourself might struggle with this. I certainly never saw this coming for me. It was certainly something that I hadn't planned for. I don't think any of us do. We just sort of, maintain that stiff upper lip and off we go and keep doing what we do, particularly as women in business. But what I've learned along the way is that mental health does not discriminate. It affects people of every age, at every stage of life, in every profession, doesn't matter what it is. And as I said, we just need to keep checking in and start talking to people. So what are some of the signs? Well, some of the signs are really fairly, when you think about it, they seem to be normal. So it's losing interest in work or hobbies, losing interest in the things that you would normally enjoy. Now, for you guys, it's been an extra challenging last 20 months because you've been locked at home, you've been locked down. And so you haven't been able to get out and do those things that you enjoy. So that just, in some cases, can actually compound the challenges that people actually face. But when we talk about depression and anxiety, it's not just I'm having a bad couple of days. So anxiety is more than just being stressed or worried in a fairly, on a day-to-day basis. It's really a common experience, and we do all have days and we have times where we're anxious or we're stressed about something, and that's just part of everyday life. Where it becomes a challenge is when it starts to overtake your life and you find yourself in a position where you just can't, you can't cope on a day-to-day basis. The things that you enjoy are no longer enjoyable. You might find that I know for me, I found that I couldn't make a clear decision about something. So I'm normally a fairly decisive person, but it would take me forever to come to a conclusion. So there are that's when anxiety and depression can kind of come to the fore, is when it's a condition that tends to present itself for more than, say, a couple of weeks at a time. It's something that we really need to seek some help about. And sometimes those things can seem really silly or really trivial to others. So I know, as I mentioned sort of before we came on, I have a team of 17 who are working in Melbourne, so we've walked that journey with you guys. I personally live in Adelaide, but even here there are still some things that people are still a little bit anxious about. So we still have mask wearing here, for example. And someone, has turned around the other day. I was talking to a lady who said, I don't want to go into the central market even though I've got a mask on. Like, I just don't want to go. I don't want to be with people. What if someone comes too close to me? So, now in this circumstance, that's a pretty normal reaction. A lot of people are a bit standoffish, and that's something I think you guys are potentially going to have to deal with when the market reopens in full and you get your crowds back, which I'm so hoping happens soon because I love the Queen Vic market. So, but to give you sort of my story. So I'm the eldest of 3 girls. I grew up in Hobart. Family has always been a huge, huge part of my life. As Madeline mentioned in the intro, I'm an absolute tragic when it comes to my animals. Like, my cats are just spoiled rotten, little partial to a nice light red. So, but when I was 10 years old, my parents separated. Now, look, that happens. It's much more common nowadays, unfortunately, than what it used to be. But what happened was I seemed to take on that second parent role. As a 10-year-old, all of a sudden I took it upon myself that I had to look after our family. And so most of my childhood memories revolved around looking after family and putting family members first in one way or another. But for as long as I can remember, I've always been fairly what I call driven. If you ask my mum, she'd say stubborn, pig-headed, any of those kinds of things that labels you want to put onto it. But I just had this attitude that I had to win or succeed at anything that I did. Like, failure for me was not an option. So from a very young age, I was starting to set myself up for the inevitable disappointments that life was going to throw at me. I spent most of my life involved in sport in one way or another, and at times that's been my absolute salvation. It's been my place to escape. But when I started work, so in my early life, small business and small business admin and reducing the burden of compliance and red tape became a real passion of mine. So, and the way that I found that I could do that was to relieve some pressure on people by becoming a bookkeeper and working in the bookkeeping space. So really what it came is bookkeeping became that tangible vehicle for me to make a difference in other people's lives about reducing that red tape and giving them information they could work with. But I was first married at 25 and we tried for 5 years to start a family. I was told that my only option for children was through IVF, and that led to 4 years of heartbreak and unsuccessful treatment, and all of those self-worth questions coming in. So why is this happening to me? What have I done wrong? And never in a million years had I ever thought that would be a problem. Like, I just thought that's, you know, you grew up, you had a family and started a job or started your business, whatever it was, but it was part of life. But with every unsuccessful treatment, I felt more and more like a failure, and I just didn't feel like anyone around me understood. No one else I knew was going through those challenges. And so all of those questions came in, you know, what am I here for? Why me? Why did everyone else get their dream of what they want, and, you know, and not me? What did I do to deserve this? So that all started at a fairly young age. So at 29, that marriage just collapsed. It was not going to survive the challenges. But I was thrown in a very short time frame of having to come up with how I was going to pay the mortgage. I lost, you know, throughout that whole process, I lost my job, or I threw my job. My ex-husband lost his job. We lost our home, you know, life partner, the prospect of having kids as well. So I was dealing with all that at age 29. And so I was left to figure out, well, how am I going to survive? How am I going to get through all this? And so some people who were really well-meaning reached out and encouraged me to take that passion I had for small business and really do something with it. So, you know, I started my first business. Now, like a lot of us, I had no intention of building any kind of an empire or taking over the world. Like, I just needed to pay the mortgage. It's simple as that. But within 3 months, I had 4 clients and a full-time workload. Within 12, I had my first employee, and 4 years later, we were a team of 12. So we grew very rapidly. Now, as I said, if you'd asked me at the beginning of what that business would look like, I would have laughed. You know, there was no way known it was intended to be that. But
that's a great achievement, Amanda, in that short period of time, and it's a big jump, you know.
It was a huge jump, and as I said, not one that I necessarily saw coming. You know, and I had business coaches around me, and, you know, and advisors, and all these people who you know, were kind of just kept pushing me to achieve more and more. And so from their perspective, I was doing great things, you know, and we were winning great awards. The biggest problem that I had was we didn't stop long enough to actually look at what we'd achieved. And I think as women, we're really bad at that. I don't think we stop often enough and just go, you know, we've had some really good wins, or I've done some really good things. There's always a better process to put in place. There's always the next level of sales to achieve. There's the next client to you know, sort of take under your belt. So, so I became really driven about making that business a success. And I loved what I was doing. I loved what I was building, and I really felt like I was making a difference. But what I worked out was that business became my entire world, because if I stopped, then I started thinking about all those self-worth questions again. Why me? Why am I going through this? Why can't I have kids? All of those kinds of things. So I just delved headfirst into my business. It became, as I say, 70, 80-hour work weeks. You know, I was still often sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning, would go home, get 3 hours sleep, be back in the office, and I did that for years. So, but with throughout all that, with the help of a business coach, I took on a business partner and a practice manager, because I got to a point where I worked out I couldn't do it all on my own. I needed to be able to delegate some stuff, and for a somewhat control freak, that was a tough decision to make as well. But as I said, so I've got those guys on board to help manage the expansion. In 2010, I relocated here to Adelaide with the vision of building another branch of the business here. And by that stage, I had a satellite office on the Gold Coast to say I was here, team of 12 in Hobart rather. But in late 2010, that relationship with the business partner and the practice manager took a very, very quick downward turn. And I'd invested really heavily in the growth of the business. I found out that there were financial backdoor conversations happening with people that I wasn't aware of. And so I now had this massive financial hole in my business. We lost our 3 biggest contracts. And I just spent 6 months just fighting fires. I didn't generate a cent of income towards the business. I didn't draw any income for myself. I was racking up credit card debts. I racked up a tax debt, really significant tax debt. So, as I said, and I had to write off tens of thousands of dollars worth of work that we had done just because people refused to pay for it. So at this point, I was just so gutted that this baby that I had built, that was mine, that was my heart and soul, was going down the toilet. And so now I find myself in a situation where my business world is not doing so great either. My private life is still falling apart. So I just felt like anything that I touched was going down the toilet, really. But I also felt really betrayed about the people who I had around me and who I'd relied on. But I had no confidence in myself to do anything to get myself out of it. So I just decided that I was going to not put on a new practice manager. I was not going to take on a new business partner. I was going to do it all myself, because that way I knew it would be right. And that was just disaster waiting to happen. So, because it just didn't matter which way I turned, I could not win a trick. Couldn't get myself back on top of anything in any of those 3 offices. As I said, average work week, 60 to 70 hours. If it was a tax lodgement time, that was pushing 80 hours a week. And it's just not sustainable. So the biggest mistake that I made in all of that was, because I became so focused on building that business, I had unintentionally isolated myself from anyone outside of that business sphere. So I stopped catching up with friends. I disconnected from family. And so now I'm in this situation where everyone who gave me support in those really early days, I'd kind of abandoned, because, as I said, I was just so consumed by that business that everything else was off the radar. The really ironic thing that was happening while all that was going on was that we were winners and finalists in a whole range of business sector awards. So, as Madeline mentioned, Telstra Businesswoman of the Year awards. I won MYB Partner of the Year, or we won as a firm. So I was giving public talks on this business and this business journey, but there was no way known in this world I was going to tell anyone that I didn't have it all together. Right? So everyone kept telling me how amazing this business I'd built was. You know, who has a bookkeeping company? Which, ironically, back then, they didn't exist. All bookkeepers worked as sole traders. That's it. So we'd had this bookkeeping company. Everyone was telling me how amazing it was and wanting me to tell my story. And I remember standing on stage at a conference in Brisbane and giving my business story and looking down at a crowd of 150 people and thinking, you gullible bunch of idiots. And thinking, how disrespectful is that? But I remember looking at them kind of going, why are you not seeing that my world's falling apart? But I became a master at hiding it from anyone. I wasn't going to tell anyone. So when the stress kind of kept building and building, I just kind of kept telling myself, get over it. Like, you run a business. It's part and parcel of what you do. You're going to have to deal with this stuff. So, you know, as we do, suck it up, move on to the next thing. But every time that I couldn't quite get on top of it, this sense of failure just kind of kept coming in. And at the end of the day, I really just kind of didn't feel that I knew where I fitted anymore. And so really what was happening through all that is I got feedback from one of my staff, who I called my work mum. She was always my moral compass. And she came to me this day and she said, you need to take some time off. She said, because, to be blunt, you're a horrible person to be around, which is not like you. So I was very lucky that I had someone who was brave enough to come and tell their boss that, you know, you're not a great person. I wasn't being rational with clients when I was talking to them. I was missing phone calls. I wasn't taking meetings. As I said, debts were racking up in the background. And then, you know, it just kept this vicious cycle happening. But I remember the day that someone actually called me out was I drove from one side of Adelaide to the other to get from a client to home. Still have no recollection of that drive from that day to this. I remember pulling up in my carport, getting out of the car, walking inside into my kitchen and realising I was home alone, and I've just dropped my keys, I've dropped my laptop bag, and I've sat in the middle of the floor and just burst into tears, just sobbing so uncontrollably. It was ridiculous. And I don't know how long it was, maybe a couple of minutes, a girlfriend rang me and she said, I don't know why I had to ring you right now, but I know I did. Are you okay? And I was so far from okay. It was crazy, right? So if you think about it, a bookkeeper, a bank statement's a pretty fundamental thing that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so she talked me through every 30 minutes of the rest of that day. And she would just give me small tasks to do. And I was sitting at my desk and she said, "What's in front of you?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's a blue piece of paper." She was getting me to describe it to her, and she said, "Amanda, that's a bank statement." That's how out of it I got. Like, I could not even recognise a bank statement to look at it. But as I said, she talked me through every 30 minutes. Luckily for me, she recognised the fact that there were some symptoms and signs of depression, that she started to put together some behaviours over the previous 3 years. But the best thing about it was she didn't actually try and fix it. She just sort of said, "Hey, I'm here to listen." She listened. I talked for I don't know how long that day, and she encouraged me to go and see a GP to get some help. But the one thing that she did do was something kind of really funny. She would ring me every morning, and she said, "My mission is to make you laugh every morning before 9 a.m. So my phone would ring, usually at about 2 minutes to 9, and it would be stupid stuff, like she'd say, "At the third beep, it will be 9 a.m." And she'd go beep, 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 and then she'd hang up the phone. And so it was stupid little stuff. It wasn't being too serious. It was kind of it was just shifting my focus and stuff. But, you know, what she helped me do was actually understand that I actually, you know, where I got to was I worked out I didn't actually have to control everything. I definitely didn't have to have all the answers to everything. And that I needed to rely on other people for help.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's, as small business owners, that's one thing that we find very difficult. And particularly when we've been working in our own business for many years, that we don't like to not have control of every little aspect of our business. And it's not until we speak to someone else or someone highlights that we've got a problem that we then decide, yeah, well, we've got to do something about this.
Yeah, and that was the point that I got to. Like, I got to a point where I had to reach out for help. And surprisingly, what I actually realised is when I got to that point of asking for help, I was really surprised at what support was available around for me. I had back in those days, there was a program which I'll talk about a little bit later that didn't exist back then. So, you know, everyone would say, "Oh, take a couple of weeks off," like people who aren't in business aren't. And I'm sure we've all had this, like, "I'll just take a couple of weeks off for a bit of a break." Like, when you're running a small business, that doesn't exist. You don't work, you don't get fed. You know, that's the reality of small business in Australia. So, you know, it wasn't as simple as being able to take a couple of weeks off or just to zone out. Or even if I did take a couple of weeks away from the office, the phone still rang and there was still staff to pay and all those kinds of things. So there are programs around now, one of which is called the NewAccess for Small Business Owners program, which is run by Beyond Blue. It's actually free. It's a free and confidential mental health coaching program. When I say mental health coaching program, the beauty of this program is it's actually manned by people who are business owners. They have a financial and a business background as well as a mental health background. So these guys are really good at understanding, you know, this thing called a small business, and that was the challenge I had. Is there was help for me as a person, but I'm like, but tell me, how do I fix me and run this business as well? And so that's what this program is designed to address. So it's 6 coaching sessions. It's absolutely free, and you can get access to it through the Beyond Blue website. So,
and I'll send you the link to that coaching program.
Yeah. So really where I got to was a point of going, okay, I need to think about me for a little while. So I pulled myself, as I mentioned, I had a big public profile at that stage. I pulled myself out of any public speaking engagements. I also pulled myself out of any face-to-face interaction that I really didn't need to have, that I could delegate to someone else to do, so that I could just focus on me for a little while. And finding that balance can be tough because, exactly as we said, sometimes as business owners we don't like handing over control, but I knew that if I didn't look after me, that business wasn't going to survive anyway. So it was pointless just trying to push on and do it all on my own. And so what I really focused on was getting some of that work-life harmony, is what I like to call it, not work-life balance, but work-life harmony. Because there are times where work has to take priority. It's just the way it is. But making sure that I was making time to catch up with friends. And that just could be a half hour out for a coffee. That's it. I'm not talking taking days and weeks off work. but I started to sort of socially interact with people again, and it made a huge difference to just rebuilding my confidence. And so it was a fair struggle at times, but what I came to realise, as I said, is particularly as women in business, I think we need to band together a little bit more. I think we need to sort of go, it's actually okay not to be okay, and about talking about, well, what do we do to help each other through this? And sometimes it's just being able to reach out to someone you know and say, I'm having a really crappy time at the moment, and they're like, I get it. Sometimes the conversation can be as simple as that. So, as I said, there are things that, the things that I've learned out about that is when I was in the middle of all that, I kind of didn't think, couldn't think much more in front of the day that I had in front of me. I certainly never thought that I would be sitting here now, we're talking 8 years down the track. I have my dream job. I'm remarried. You know, I'm living in a city that I love. Do I work hard? Absolutely, I still work hard. But I have boundaries around myself now. So making time to go for that 20-minute walk sometime at lunchtime, making time to have that coffee with friends. In my case, I have very strict boundaries around, I'm very happy to put in a 12 or 13, 14-hour day during the week. Try not to do that too often, but I'm happy to do that. But the trade-off for that is weekends are off limits. Right? So weekends are friends. Now I know that's a little bit more difficult with you guys, in the work situation that you have. But it's about having boundaries in place so that you know when to actually step back and giving yourself permission to do that. And one of the things that I see women in business do more than men is they say, oh yeah, I have the boundaries, but then they still take the phone call at 10 o'clock at night. They're still sitting there doing the books at 10:30 at night. Right? So it's not simple enough just to have boundaries in place. You actually have to be able to stick to them, and that's where the programs like NewAccess to Small Business can come into play and help you actually do some of that kind of stuff.
And it's difficult, Amanda, when you're juggling your work and your life. And as women, we're also doing the housework and we're looking after the kids and the grandkids, if you like. And so our day is really full, very much so.
Like our days just are always full. So, but I think there are a couple of things that I think I've learnt. The first is learning where you draw your identity from. And as I said, for 8 or 9 years, I drew that entirely out of what that business looked like, entirely out of what we were achieving or not achieving at the time, So my entire identity was tied up in that. So finding something, finding where your true identity comes from. And I know that sounds like a little bit of a motherhood statement, but it was an absolute game changer, I have to say. Taking the time out to have those laughs with friends. Things like limiting the amount of alcohol that you take in. We tend to have it, like we jested about it earlier.
I don't like that one.
I love a good red the same as anyone. But making sure we get that exercise, that we're eating well. And that was the thing when I went to my GP and we talked about a mental health plan, I had these visions of me sitting in a corner with a white coat and arms wrapped around me. The reality of it was we looked at my diet, we looked at so how much exercise I was getting, my diet, whether I was sleeping. Like I'd have nights where I would just wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning and my mind racing, so it was coming up with strategies for that. So things like have a little notepad next to the bed so that if you do wake up with those kinds of things, write it down. And then, once it's out of your head, you're much more likely to be able to fall back to sleep. For me, it's also about getting involved in projects that are actually bigger than me. So just as a simple example, my husband and I volunteer at a city mission every year on Christmas Day. We travel to Cambodia to visit, the NGO. We actually sponsor 4 kids through an organisation called Transform Cambodia. So we go and we visit those kids, So, and what that does is it just kind of makes you thankful for, even though we have challenges, you have the ability to, to sort of put things into a little bit of perspective. So, but look, at the end of the day, really what it comes down to is what I've come to realise is that it actually doesn't matter how desperate we become, how hopeless things seem. At the end of the day, the sun is going to come up tomorrow. But learning to be thankful for those really little wins that we have. And as I said, really early in the piece. It's something that as women we do really badly. We don't stop and pat ourselves on the back enough for what we do. Right? So celebrating those little wins, being thankful for those really little things that we have. We're not always in control of what goes on around us. That's the reality of the world. But we can take control of how we actually respond to it. And as I say, that's things like your boundaries. So look, I think recovery is about learning to manage those circumstances and control how you respond. Look, I have many, many more good days now than bad days. It was a shocking time of my life to go through. But as I say to people, my mental health journey doesn't define who I am, but it is part of who I am. So, it's not walking away from it. Now, not everyone will speak about it. Not everyone has to speak about it. Everyone will deal with it in their own way. And that's the biggest challenge with mental health, is that, let's just say the 5 of us on the call here all had challenges. The way that each of us would deal with it would be completely different. And it's because our life circumstances are different.
I think also because, as business women, and we're running these businesses, and it's not only the control, but it's also about, we think that we can do it ourselves. We don't think that we need the help. And because we've got everything else under control, we think that we can control this as well. Yep. And I've been there, I know. So yep. And one of the things that resonates with me about what you've spoken about is that we become masters at hiding, particularly when you're at the forefront and people are looking up to you, and so that you have this facade going, which is not doing you any good.
Yep. And look, and it's a really misconception with people who don't have lived experience with this kind of thing. It's really easy for someone to kind of look at it and go, oh, just snap out of it. Like I did that enough to myself. I didn't need anyone else telling me that. And the thing is that you can't just snap out of it. Like it is a situation that needs to be managed. But the reality is most people will actually recover from depression and anxiety. For some people, it might be a one-off episode. It's not necessarily a lifelong infliction that we're dealing with here. It can be what we call situational depression, if I talk just about that. Now, look at what we've all been through in the last 20 months. Like if any one of us was to turn around and go, hey, I've got a depression journey that I've been on for the last 20 months, or, you end up on in the next 12 months, because we might be coming out of lockdown, but there's a lot of recovery to go yet. So, as I said, there's a fair chance that someone if not you, will go through this. But it's recognising the fact that there is help if we actually are brave enough to reach out and ask for it. And as I say, it can come from some of the most unlikely places. I've had people encourage me from places that are, I'm talking 10-year-old kids who just find joy in so many small things, So it's looking for that kind of thing as well. But look, the reality is that we're all going to have challenges. We're all going to have disappointments in life. It's, as I said, it is about how we bounce back and how we respond to it. Stress isn't going to go away. But we do have to learn how to manage it. And having that healthy lifestyle, that going for those 20-minute walks, put a 20-minute walk in your diary each day. Like if you're like me who live and breathe your appointments out of your diary, put a 20-minute walk in your diary and stick to it. That's the main thing. One thing to put it in there, but you actually have to get up and do it. But get up and go for that walk. And it could just be 20 minutes to walk around the corner and grab that coffee and come back to your desk, but it's still a break. So, stay connected with people. And, and as I say to people who are leaders, as leaders, come out from behind the desk and talk to our people is the other thing. As I said, I've got a team of 20 that I manage, 17 of who are in Melbourne, 23, sorry. 17 are in Melbourne. And sometimes, like I had a staff member that we couldn't put our finger on, something wasn't quite going right. Like I wouldn't say she was depressed, but she was. But then I started to recognise some of what I used to do. Some of the, hey, yeah, I'm fine, it'll all be good, laughing and jovial all the time. and that kind of thing. So it's watching out for, they're the kinds of things that we're looking out for, in particularly if we're working with others, we have staff or we have a team, is looking out for those subtle changes. So is someone maybe, are they starting to turn up late for meetings when they were always on time? Are they not answering the phone? If you ask them out for a coffee, are they starting to say no? Those kinds of things. And I know that we have an adjustment period to get back into, as we come out of lockdowns and those kinds of things. But it's important, a couple of things that's important is not to push the point with someone. People will talk when they're ready, and that's really important as well. But, Beyond Blue do an amazing amount of work in helping people, whether or not it be you, your team, people that you work with, your spouses, and that's the other thing is, not sure how many of you have had the situation as well, but part of that journey was actually having to journey my husband through the challenges that he had, and because men put this tough bravado on, as we know. They tend to think they're a little bit bulletproof at times. So that was a challenge too, of learning how to deal with him, because dealing with him was different to my journey, if that makes sense. So Madeline, I know that you mentioned one of the challenges that we're seeing around is it's not just about us and the challenges. How do we deal with the men in our lives who are maybe not prepared to reach out for help? And there are other support groups that are available. So there's Mates in Construction is a classic example, right? Mates in Construction is exactly what it says. It's designed or accessible by anyone, but it's aimed at men in the construction industry, and it's about blokes talking to blokes. The thing that I worked out is I could talk to my husband until I was blue in the face, and that was kind of like, yeah, okay. But the best thing I did was to try and get him to talk to his mates, who were had a little bit more balanced approach to life, preferably, because he wasn't going to talk to me. Like, whether we like it or not, they have this protection thing.
They do.
And admitting weakness, especially to their partners. And I've spoken to him quite openly about this since, and he says it all the time, and he said, I wasn't going to tell you that, that I kind of didn't have it together, but I knew he didn't. When he couldn't make up whether he wanted a hot or a cold breakfast in the morning, I recognised all that stuff that I went through. And again, the same as my friend did with me. Sit, listen, open the door for a conversation. And they'll walk through it when they're ready. So it's tough though. It's really tough to watch someone you love go through this as well.
It certainly is, and I have had a loved one go through it, and male, and it's very difficult getting through to it. But when they call you and say and they cry, it breaks your heart. And you just don't know what to do with that. You don't know how to help them, and you wish you could.
So one of the things that, and this might be of interest to you guys, especially being in Melbourne, so Deakin University are currently running a program. Madeline, I think SBMS are already part of it, but
we are.
Yeah, so there's the ability to run some mental health first aid training. Now, it kind of sounds a little bit over the top, but really what it is, we do St John's first aid courses and that kind of thing if someone has a fall or gets a cut or is in a car accident or whatever it might be. We don't ever do that with mental health. So Deakin University are running this program. It's called Counting on You. It's being done, Beyond Blue are one of their partners as well. We at ICB are an industry partner as well. But there are plenty of other providers that do that as well, do this mental health first aid training. And really what that is that's actually arming you with the information to say, if someone says no, if I ask if someone's okay and they say no, where do I go with that? And that's when I spoke to my friends down the track. That was the issue that they had. They said, we could see something wasn't quite right, but we didn't know how to help if you said you weren't okay, right? And it's one of the key reasons why we don't ask people if they're okay. So what mental health first aid training does is actually coach you through where do you go with that, right? And the very first lesson you learn is it's not up to you to fix them. You can't, unless you're specifically trained in this area. It's about listening, it's about having engaged conversation, it's about where do you direct them for help. But it's also too, I say, it's just about helping you understand, well, what do I say when someone says, no, I'm not good? So, and there's quite a lot of mental health first aid training programs available now.
I don't know, ladies, do you have anything you'd like to ask or add? Well, we've got Amanda here.
Now, also let me say, nothing's off the table with me when it comes to this stuff.
Nothing's off the table. And what I might do at this point is, first of all, thank you, Amanda, but I might just stop the recording so that we can ask questions if anyone would like to. You know, just a moment.